Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the third of our winter series of webinars this year, our 17th over the period in which we've been doing this. And today the focus is on accounting and women. And I will pass you over to Supun, who is going to be our chair for today, and she will introduce our presentations.
So our first speaker is Ryoko. I hope we have Ryoko in the call.
I'm here.
Yes, we do. Yes, thank you. Yes, so Ryoko is from Osaka University of Economics, and Ryoko's research examines male support for women entering the bookkeeping profession. Was it a genuine acceptance or a strategic form of exclusion? So Ryoko, the floor is yours.
Good morning to everyone and good evening to participants from Japan. Okay, so thank you all for this opportunity, and my special thanks to the organizers and the chair for letting me be here. Okay, and since I want to share many points with all of you, let me start. Okay, and this is today's outline. Okay, the separation strategy of the bookkeeper and clerk as a female domain, and the professional accountant as a gently male domain constructed the professional accountant in the UK, or the country of the origin of the professional accountant. Okay. The background to establish the accounting profession as a male domain in society was the campaign to educate women about household accounting. So the accounting was becoming gendered in parallel with the professionalization project, or even before that. So how was accounting gendered? So in Italy's commercial cities, men and women were taught bookkeeping. However, this was eliminated with the development of school education. And in the UK, accounting education institution before the professionalization basically assumed a male audience. And in Ireland, bookkeeping education was not proposed for girls' school. So we can see women being excluded from the transition of accounting knowledge through education. So this is a case study, genders accounting education in Meiji era Japan, focusing on the first women's commercial school, which provided both households and commercial accounting education. So this serves to explore the interface between the private and public spheres. So this presentation purpose is to examine the people and motivations behind the development of the first women's commercial school in Japan, founded in 1903, to determine the factors contributing to the creation of the woman role as bookkeeper. And it explored the norm of the good wife and wise mother as key to explaining both strategy for gendering the Japanese accounting role, male and female. Okay, so based on archival research and utilizing the theory of adaptive radiation from biology, along with sociological niches that evolved from it, this demonstrates how, during the Meiji era, a social norm surrounding the accounting role of men and women were shifting. Japanese women established a niche as female bookkeepers in response to this social change. And so the accounting role of Japanese women can be traced back to the norms of British girls' accounting roles. However, to adapt to Japanese society, this role developed along a different path from that of Britain, its country of origin, and created a different sphere. So let's get started. Okay. And in 1868, Japan abandoned the feudal system, which has almost completely closed it off from the rest of the world for more than 2 centuries. And the newly reformed Japanese government adopted the name Meiji, and essential institutions and system were established. Okay. For example, the first national bank, or the Japan's first joint stock company, or the Ministry of Mint. So newly introduced banking and government office systems, where double entry bookkeeping was promptly adopted, were modeled on Western countries. So beside this organization, bank and the government office, traditional Japanese commerce continued using the Japanese accounting record system. And around the 1900s, commerce adopted Western-style bookkeeping. And at the same time, the first school system on a national scale was promulgated in the beginning of the Meiji era. And the bookkeeping instruction was stipulated from its inception. So the contents of education for girls after the primary level was established as the Higher Women's School in 1895. And the reason to open opportunity for women was war. The experience of the Sino-Japanese War raised the need to educate girls as citizens, and it gave legitimacy for the idea of the good wife and wise mother as an educational objective for girls. And the good wife and wise mother concept expanded into educational content through public higher women's school, specializing in upper middle class women. And there was an explicit introduction of household bookkeeping, which was influenced by the UK textbooks and curriculum. At the same time, this idea of the good wife and wise mother representing the girls' education in Japan was formed from 1897 to 1907. So now let's move on to the commercial education. In the world of commerce, ability was everything. So diplomas were not highly valued, and there was little motivation among the merchant class to study at commercial school. And in 1885, nearly 10 years after establishing the school system, the specific contents of commercial education was decided. And slowly, in 1899, commercial schools were clearly defined as secondary education institutions. And following this, in 1903, the advanced levels were positioned as vocational schools. And in 1903, the only commercial school that worked as an advanced level school was the Tokyo Higher Commercial School. So even if there was a socially accepted belief that commercial education was generally of low value, the Japanese economy developed significantly as a result of the victories in the Sino-Japanese War and Russo-Japanese War. So since the 1900s, a new professional occupation, or the bank employee, was added, and it becomes a word for diploma or school graduate. And the Tokyo Higher Commercial School was a leading school for training office workers in pre-war Japan sales, accounting, management, and other administrative roles. An important point, in the Meiji era, those who carried out administrative work were known as office workers. So there was no gender-based terminology. So And the people involved in the Tokyo Higher Commercial School, which trained in new profession, which accounting knowledge as office worker, supported the first woman commercial school, which we are going to discuss here. Okay, and Miss Kaetsu founded Japan's first commercial school for girls, with support from male teachers and students who studied in the Tokyo Higher Commercial School. Okay. And the founder, Kaetsu, received encouragement from her economics teacher to study bookkeeping. The economics teacher, Kinshiro, who studied in the US and the UK, told Kaetsu about the women's working as a bookkeepers in London, and his vision of a future where women will also work as bookkeepers in Japan. So the role of the household accounting and corporate accounting for Japanese women began with those of British women. So at the time when society was finally beginning to recognize the need for commercial education for men, what were the aims of commercial education for girls? Based on the school establishment application documents in 1903, the purpose was to teach practical subjects for those who wishes to work in the commercial works in the future. And the targets were the children of merchants and students at various schools. And a newspaper from 1903 stated that the number of graduates did not keep up with the number of job offers by the companies. So the businesses appreciated the students of the first women commercial school. However, in 1909, Kaetsu stated that she saw that the woman also needed to be independent and self-employed. However, she saw that women cannot possibly compete with men in the world of intense activity. So she said that she stated that she changed the mind and she changed the aim of the school. And she changed us to train a practical female of the household with an economic mindset. In addition, with the possibility of losing one's husband in mind, they will also provide education as office workers. So why did she change the educational goal at this time? Okay, so there were some social changes which affect commercial and women education. Okay, firstly, between the Russo-Japanese War and the World War I, a new middle class, had established of a new middle class which had following 4 points appear. Okay, firstly, they carry out intellectual work, and they work based on a salary, and they create a new social class that exists between the capitalists and wage laborers. And they have a medium standard of living. And they form a nuclear family, which was living without the husband parent. So housewife concentrated on housework and child care. And same times in the women's education market, the number of students at higher women's school increased. This implied open the access for education not only for upper middle class family daughter. So as consequence, start to raise the mismatch in contents. So there are need for more practical education to become housewife, and in parallel, in the 1900s, clerical work gained social recognition as a new form for women before marriage, even though it was not well seen. So the traditional idea of the good wife and wise mother could not justify women working. So at this time, the contents of the education at the good wife and wise mother gradually changed. And the objective of the training good wife and wise mother was shared, but the contents started to become multi-meaning, depending on the social class of the female students. So at a time when there were no specific regulation on the women's commercial education contents, the educational policy will reflect the founders' intentions. So as points to consider, Ms. Kaetsu, she was an entrepreneur and she was an educator. So based on the newspaper, since she opened the school, she was flexible to adapting the social needs. So for example, knowing that there is demand, she started to operate the dormitory to train maids. Or being in a competitive women's school market, she analyzed her school situation well and was conscious of which school succeed. And at that time, she specified 2 prestigious schools, both targeting upper class family daughter. So after changing the first women's commercial school education aims in 1911, she specified that target students as common people who needed to carry out household matters. Then in 1915, once again, it is made clear that the contents of education differs depending on the girls being educated. So she was a school proprietor and needed to keep she school running. And the school was struggling financially, and Miss Kite was living in the dormitory and working for free. Okay, so to keep running the business, she was sensitive to social needs and adapted accordingly. And at the same time, she was educator. So she may have been raising the girls who would be needed in society. Why? Because she was a working single female. And so she knew the difficulty to keep working in competitive markets. As an introduction to Kaetsu at the time in the school review book written by a man, he said, she is still single and she devotes the love that should be given to a boy or a husband to her school. And she was manly.
Ryoko, sorry. Oh,
Yeah,
we
thank you.
can hear you now.
And Kaetsu herself wrote the following as the reason for becoming an educator, that I used to cry a lot when I looked in the mirror and saw how ugly I looked. And at the same time, I couldn't get married. So that's why she became an educator, or she started to operate the school. So discussion and conclusion. Okay, male support in the public sphere. Okay, through the male or the Tokyo Higher Commercial School students or involved person travels to Britain and America, Japanese male observed and heard about the way in which British women were entering the business world. So the male foresaw that having women working at bank counters and in accounting routine work, or taking gender into account, will contribute to the development of the Japanese economy in the future. So they helped guide the development of the first women commercial school. And then female supports in the public sphere. By the late 1890s, male graduates who had previously taken it for granted that they would go into the world of bureaucracy began to see the business world as a viable alternative. So the men, or the Tokyo Higher Commercial School student in this case, needed to focus on their role outside the home to succeed in the competitive world of business. And unlike the books that educated British women about household accounting, in the process of adapting to Japanese society, the scope of Japanese women's household management extends to all aspects of their property. So women supported their working husband outside the household and enjoyed maximum authority in the private sphere. So they coexisted in the society as a new middle class of salarymen supported by practical good wife and wise mother, backed by their economic knowledge. And the female in the public and private sphere. Okay, Nishi states that the women who graduated from the first woman commercial school were the forerunners of today's office ladies. However, they were not the children of the accommodated families, but the daughter of the merchant, artisan, and lower class businessmen, who were therefore trained as office workers. So, become a good wife and wise mother who can carry out housework and child rearing, could marry into a higher school class as the wife of a salaried worker. And the women's commercial school created a new niche, a single female office worker who worked diligently and in a feminine way and future practical good wife and wise mother of a nuclear family. So the assignment of, male guidance in the private sphere, the assignment of gender-oriented female roles in corporate accounting by men has left Japanese women lacking the incentive to enter society. And this relationship was underpinned by the concept of the good wife and wise mother. So this concept was created by men and was used to guide Japanese women through education. So as a result, the entryway for Japanese girls into the accounting field did not appear as an achievement of women fighting against exclusion by men, as had happened in the UK, but as a result of guidance through male acceptance. And the underpinning key concept was the good wife and wise mother, which changed its substance in response to change in historical circumstance. And I think the time is over. So anyway, so the first women commercial school contributed in forming a new middle class woman role in accounting. Yeah, this is all. Thank you for your listening.
We have 10 minutes for questions, so please feel free to raise your hand on Zoom. I'm not really sure how to do it myself, but there should be a way. So yeah, please feel free to raise your hand or just type your questions in the chat. Thank you. And I can see Martin. Martin, your hand is raised. Hello, Martin.
Hi there. Thanks very much for your presentation. That was really, really interesting because that's something I wasn't aware of. But just to share with you, it may or may not be relevant. It may be after your period. Martin Hebel, myself, and Carmen Martinez have an article in Accounting History Review in 2015 about the role of the chief accountant at Guinness. We used the word clerks in there. They were all female. We decided just to call them clerks at that time. So that might help you, support your comment early on about clerks in accounting being female. But also, since we did that research, which was back in 2013 or 14, the Guinness Archive has published a full register of female clerks, which begins in the 1920s. So, you could see when people joined, retired, and what their job was. Don't know if that's of any relevance to you, but if you search for register of female clerks, you'll find, and use the word Guinness, you'll find it. But also maybe have a read of the article I mentioned. Thanks.
Thank you for comment.
Thanks, Martin. Any questions? I'm just trying to.
Gary?
Harry?
Hello, can you hear me? It's Gary Carnegie.
Yes, we can hear you. Go
Hi,
on.
Ryoko. How are you going today?
Fine. Very good. Enthusiasm.
Oh, good, good. So who had the win here? Like to cut to the chase, who won this battle? Was it the men had someone to help them at home? Do a bit of accounting, or did the women win because the men always used to like to do it and keep control of the women, or was it a win-win? A win for men and a win for women. How would you sum it up?
Okay, it's still needed to evidence for data, but depend on the period. I think during when the Japanese economy was good, well, I think the winner maybe was win-win. Let's say win-win.
Ah, okay.
But nowadays, because the economy is decreasing, or just hearing the news around the society, I feel that the men also feeling frustration under constant pressure. Maybe this, how can I say, the essence of what I deduce for the middle class, it's already done. Or maybe we'll start to change the win-win relationship. But I think that from at least before the 200 years, the Japan accounting in gender was win-win relation. I hope.
Okay, and to what extent do you think you might be able to lead other people to conduct research of women in accounting, in accounting's past? Do you have an agenda for making this a major topic? And if so, what sort of research or would you recommend?
In the other country?
Yeah, anywhere, Japan or like tonight, you're talking to people in various countries.
Because nowadays I'm comparing with the UK case, but what I realized that unlike in the UK, the social classes in Japan are classified according to the economic level. So for this reason, in Japan, it is likely that moving between the classes from upper to middle to low was easier in Japan than in the UK. And I think it
Okay.
also so we can search based on the, how can I say, the social class, but the meaning of the social class can differ country by country.
Yes, okay. That's a good point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gary and Ryoko. So I do see another hand raised, but before we go there, there was a question on the chat. So if you could quickly take it, this is from Angelica. So your research focuses on a single school. Could you elaborate on how you extrapolated these findings to represent the situation across Japan? And there's another related question. So what considerations did you take into account to ensure the broader applicability of your conclusions? You're muted, Ryoko?
Yes, I'm aware of the limitation of my research being a case study of a single school. But when I look into the female clerks and commercial education of the time, there is a high probability that this school, this first women commercial school, and the founder Kaetsu will be mentioned. In that sense, I have chosen this school as an example of a pioneers who influenced other schools. Still, I mean, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Ryoko, and I hope that answers your question, Angelica. And I will take your question. Well, the profile says SS. I'm not really, I'm sorry. So if I
Suki.
Yeah,
yeah,
Suki. Hi.
yes, sorry. Yeah, we'll take your question.
Morning, everyone, or good evening. Hi, Ryoko. Thank you for that. That was really interesting. A couple of questions, actually. I just wondered what was the legacy of this school? What happened afterwards? Did it give rise to other similar institutions or other schools where others developed, as a result of this one? Did they become more common? And the second question related to it is, are there examples of other women pioneers in accounting in Japan that you have come across in your research?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, the other schools were made, and yeah, still I need to get data, more or data, or all data related to the women commercial school. And especially I'm interested in during the World War II and the different era, the government promotes to change the different type of girls or women's school to commercial school. I don't know why, but yes, thank you. And the other one, the other points, the pioneers women in accounting. Yes, now I'm focusing as other topics. The first CPA, first Japanese women's professional accountants, which I close to deadline, but I still funny.
No, that sounds like you've got a lot of future projects there. I think perhaps the idea that more women's schools were created during the war is perhaps part of the war effort, and of course there's a literature on that already in other countries. So it sounds like you have a really interesting research agenda going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thanks. And we have another hand raised. Sorry, again, I don't see the name.
Steve.
Steve, yes, please go on, Steve.
Thanks very much, Ryoko. I think there are many dimensions of that study which are worthy of developing further. There's several things in there. Many thanks for your presentation. Just one very simple question, really. Do you have any insight to the actual curriculum, the content of the accounting that these girls were taught, and whether it kind of bridged the commercial and the domestic?
Yes, I have a curriculum information, and it specify in this case, this first women commercial school specify the household bookkeeping, commercial bookkeeping, and bank bookkeeping. And I still need to read, but I think it had an influence because the government and the bank officer was the pioneering company which adopted the Western style bookkeeping. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm just looking at the different screens that I have here to see whether there are any other questions. Yeah, it seems like we have no other questions, so I think we should be all right to conclude. Well done, Ryoko. Thank you very much for that insightful presentation again. We have another exciting presentation by Emanuela Cafaro and Valerio Antonelli from the University of Salerno. So their research explores how accounting was used as a tool to shape and govern women in the 19th century Italy. Emanuela and Valerio, over to you.
The research project that I'm going to present is dealing with the role of accounting in shaping, creating the perfect woman and mother. And we choose a specific case study that is the Reale Istituto Femminile della Santissima Annunziata, that is a female school located near Florence, as we will see. Our time frame covers the year 1865 until the beginning of the 20th century, and we choose to start from 1865 just because the unification of Italy took place a few years before, in 1861. And starting from this point, there was a double political objective here, that is to create the perfect mother on one end, and on the other end, to unify the culture and habits of the newborn Italian Republic. So this is a dual purpose of the government here. So very briefly, this is our research agenda. What I'm going to show is the aim of the paper, prior literature, the theoretical framework we adopted, sources, evidence, and conclusions. As I mentioned before, the aim of the article is to analyze the Foucauldian perspective, because we adopted the concept of disciplinary power developed by Foucault. And we use this theoretical lens in order to analyze the role played by calculative devices. So we adopted a broader meaning of accounting, not only accounting books specifically, but all the calculations, numbers, and so on. Adopted by this female school, that is the Reale Istituto Femminile della Santissima Annunziata. And the aim of the school and the government for us was to create a model, a perfect upper class and middle class woman and mother. So a good wife and a good mother, again, as we noted in the previous case. And as I told, we choose to study the period that followed unification of the Italian Republic, just because before Italy was still divided in several states. So after the unification, there was the need to create the Italian populations. So to create a shared culture, language also, and to disseminate these habits among the populations, especially the upper and middle class. We considered previous literature about in the accounting history at an international level, of course. And here I tried to cluster this literature. In particular, the first group of articles we consider is the literature developing the role of accounting in creating a governable person. So not only in a school and educational context, but at a broader level, also in other contexts, for example, in colonial settings and in other settings. But here we consider this literature just because here the aim of accounting is similar. Then accounting and examination, of course, and then we focus specifically on the literature about dealing with accounting in school and accounting in education more specifically. As I mentioned before, we adopted a theoretical lens that is the concept of disciplinary power, developed by Foucault in a specific book, Discipline and Punish, specifically. As we know, disciplinary power is a form of power exerted upon single individuals while there is, of course, a different kind of power, that is biopower, exerted upon the populations. Here we are at a level of individuals and single person, we can say. We consider some concept developed by Foucault, that is the regulation of space-time dimension. In this case, time is very important because time must be useful, must be very regulated and scheduled in a very capillary, we can say, way. Also, the space dimension is very important. Space, it is not only a physical space, but also a way of classifying individuals and grouping individuals and so on. All of these dimensions contribute to the managing of the body. So the body should be managed, and for this reason, for example, some aspect of human life, such as the diet, should be very carefully regulated. Then the process of examination that was very, of course, fundamental in a school context, and the examination is only the third stage of a process that involves hierarchical observation, so observing features of the way in which people behave, and then normalizing judgment, so create a model, exactly, a benchmark to which the individual should conform to. And finally, the examination process, that means verifying the degree of reachment of this benchmark predefined. And also the mechanism of punishing and rewarding. So, of course, if someone is not compliant with the benchmark, need to be punished. And in the same way, if someone is more is nearer to the model defined, he need to be rewarded. So all of these aspects define the way in which, especially in this school context, the female students should be more adherent to a model. So the way in which they conform to a model. Of course, Foucault does not speak specifically about school. School is just one of the institutions because the focus there is especially prisons, military academia, firms, and also other settings, not only school specifically. We adopted several sources, primary and secondary sources. The primary sources came directly from the school archive that is located in the school building that is still operating today. Most especially, we consider personal files, classroom registers, timetables, account books, and so on, several kinds of reports coming from the archive. But we also consider laws and regulations issued by the states, and in particular by the Ministry of Education, because, as I mentioned before, there is a central control by the states through the action of the Ministry of Education, because the need was to, as I told, unify also the cultural level of the population, especially in the upper class, with the specific aim. So we consider also laws and regulation by the states. book pamphlet, and finally we consider also secondary sources, especially books and all the publications dealing with the Reale Istituto della Santissima Annunziata in order to understand its history, evolution, and so on. So these are our sources. Something about the female education in the Kingdom of Italy. As I mentioned, despite the school was private, so was managed at a private level, that was a central control by the state by means of the Ministry of Education that define rules in terms of how the school has been to manage. Just because the Ministry of Education and the states wants to control all the educational apparatus in this case. Educate women was very important at that time to define a very specific gender identity, we can say. So we choose a female school just to verify and demonstrate how the state and the school, the educational systems as a whole, identified in a very peculiar way a gender identity in this case, because women must be also and especially in the upper and middle class a good wife and mother in this case. So they need to acquire education in terms of moral, religion, that were very important subjects in our case. Also because they need to disseminate this moral and religious culture and attitudes in their family once they got married after, of course, the educational process. Something about female education in the cultural context of Italy. As I told, female education was very important, especially disseminate the religious concept and moral concept here. So it was very important to create a particular gender identity and responsibility in such a way for the Italian women in the middle and upper class. This is the institution that we have chosen. This is a picture of the institution. As I told, it is still operating right now as a secondary school. This is the reason why we found the archive exactly in these buildings. So it is located in Villa Medicea di Poggio Imperiale. That is near Florence. The school was created before the unification in the Grand Duchy of Tuscany under the Grand Duke Leopold II. So it was operating by 1825. But as I told, we choose to analyze the period following the unification of Italy to understand also the intersection with the government and the political objectives of the government after the unification. It was managed, as I told, at a local level, but all the aspects dealing with rules and also staff recruitment came from the state. So there is a state intervention to define also the features of people working in the school, especially at the top level, at the level of directress and vice directress and so on. It was the state to define these features. It is a school in which attended especially the upper class and also coming from all over Italy, from the south, but also from abroad. So we have also foreigner students, not only Italian students. There were some famous students attending in the school, for example, Ledda Mussolini. And this is the clue that the school is devoted to the upper class, of course. This is the organizational chart of the school. Here we have the unitary and the total cost for all the staff. We have the directress at the top of the managing system of the school, the deputy directress, the spiritual director. That was also very important because, as I mentioned, religion was very important and shaping religious attitude was very important here. Then we have the teachers of different subjects. As we can see, young ladies studied several subjects, for example, natural history, French, English, and Italian languages, drawing, piano, singing, and so on. And all these subjects were taught just because they need to disseminate a good knowledge for the young women, because they need to become good talker to in the social occasion. This is the reason why they study these very, very different number of subjects, of topics. These are the teaching subjects. So we have, as I told, the religion, first of all, history, Italian language, arithmetic and geometry. These teaching subjects were divided by courses because the school involved girls starting from the age of 9 until the age of 18. So there were different courses for different ages, of course. Of course, they need to learn also dancing and singing, especially for social occasion. So here we have a report that testified the way in which time dimension was managed. As I mentioned when I spoke about the theoretical framework, the time dimension was very important. So to manage, to control the body, it is very important to control all the daily activities. In this case, female students need to do. So this is the picture of the timetable, basically. Each time of the day was very carefully regulated. So there is a time for praying, for having a break, for studying, for going to bed, and so on. So every hours of the day was very, very carefully regulated. Also, the space dimension is very important. Here you can see some pictures of the different rooms of the school. For example, here we have the room in which they had dinner or lunch. As you can see, there is a sort of hierarchical structures here, because in the center you can see the directress, vice directress, and the spiritual director, while here in the middle you can see the other teachers sitting in front of the students, so to control them, that are eating just all around a circular table. This is the visiting room because female students could be visited by their relatives or parents just in a scheduled way, of course. So just in a day of the week or with the permission of the directress. And they can only meet these relatives in the visiting room. While there were rooms for studying, of course, and rooms for praying. So there was a clear separation of a physical space devoted to each of the activities they need to do during their period in the school.
Sorry to interrupt. You have less than 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. So this is the menu because as I told, also the diet was very important. So you can see here the daily menu. The diet is important because they need to guarantee the physical efficiency of the girl. Also, clothing is an aspect that has been regulated in the school. The girls obviously wore a uniform, and there was we found in the archive accounting records recording clothing documents and so on. Another important aspect is the examination, and we have this record that is the book to record the exam and the grades the girls received for different classes. So to push the students to study more and more, it was created a ritual of examination. So the exam took place twice a year, the first time in April and then in September, and that was exactly a rituals because everyone could attend the exam and could assist the exam. So all the other students, the directress, and also the relatives. This is the report for the awarding process because if one of the female students was brilliant in something, was awarded exactly, and there was also, as you can see, a report for the awarding process. Also here there was a ceremony to attribute awardings to the students, exactly to create this model of perfection. This is the list of punishment. So also punishing is important here. When people misbehave. So this is the list of punishment that consists in demerit points, meals alone, forbidden walks, complete isolation, until reaching the expulsion from the school. Also, the admission was very carefully regulated. In particular, as I told, religion was very important. Indeed, only Catholic girls belonging to honorable families could attend the school, and they have to provide to attending the school a certificate of the baptism and also a certificate of good health provided by the doctor. So also the admission was very well regulated. So in conclusion, we show the statute, the regulation, education program, daily diet, clothing norms, and everyday life standards, and all of them are put in the service of the human body control, of course. So accounting played a role here for us in facilitating this process of managing the body and controlling. There was a detailed distribution of space and time, as we saw previously, and also as we saw, accounting or better calculative devices played a role here. And there was a mechanism of examination following by a process of punishment and awardings. So it was created into the school a real penalty accountancy system. In addition, the forms of state financing and the form of state's control demonstrate that also the state played a role in order to controlling the creation of this perfect mother and woman for the middle and upper class society. Thank you for your attention.
Steve, I can see your hand raised, so go on.
You can. Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Emmanuel. It's a really interesting institution that you're looking at. Can I just go back to something you mentioned at the very beginning, which kind of slightly perplexed me? You mentioned that the creation of the perfect woman, which is kind of the project of this school, was connected to the project of Italian unification. I couldn't quite see the link with unification. Why is the creation of a perfect woman so integral to the creation of the new Italian state?
No, there were two different purposes. The first purpose is to create exactly this model of perfect women with all these values of religion. And on the other hand, there was the need to disseminate a unified culture, for example, in terms of the language, because in Italy, in the different states, they didn't even speak the same languages. Also nowadays, we have some different dialects. So there was the need to unificate Italians at the cultural level. And so, in my opinion, there are two different purposes. Of course, also the creation of gender identity is part of this process, because they want a woman who is manageable in some way, we can say. So a woman who is very dedicated to the house, the family, and so on. So this is the way they see the female figure at that time in Italy, but also not only in Italy, I mean, also in the other country. But the sense of the unification is about also the other aspect of the other cultural aspect, especially, in my opinion, language and also cultural habits.
Thanks, both. Martin, you have questions. You're muted, Martin.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, Emmanuel. That was a really wonderful presentation. And just two quick comments. I can't help but contrast what you've said in your study to the very unfortunate cases of the Magdalen laundries in Ireland, where young girls were disciplined and punished in a very negative way. And I think FOCO is used a lot, maybe as in negative views of power. And this, to me, certainly is way more positive than the use of discipline and punishment in the normal meanings of the words in the Magdalen laundries in Ireland. So you could maybe cross-reference. There's very limited literature on the counting in the Magdalen laundries, but there's a lot of literature on the Magdalen laundries themselves. So were run by the Religious Sisters of Charity. I don't know if you want to do that, but they are both Catholic organizations involved in education, in quotes. And the other comment that came to mind was, like in the Magdalen laundry, there's very little on accounting. And I was just wondering, do you have any information on, did that institute or school, like, did it break even? Did it cost money? Did it generate a surplus? So to get back to the actual accounting of it.
Thank you, Martin, for your comments. Yes, we have other information about the accounting system in a more specific term in the institution. We have the financial statements and the budget, so we have a more specific accounting books. We use it in the article, in the full version of the article, of course.
Thank you. And Richard, would you like to ask your question?
Thanks. Yeah, very interesting. Of course, in the background of the social structure, even though the Italian state was now independent, you've still got the church in the background and maybe more in the foreground here. And of course, the church has rigid gender identity. So, women have no role in the sacraments of the church. And this permeates most of Europe, I think. I mean, even my father, it's not all that long ago, 50 years ago, thought it was a waste of time for my sister to go to university because she's only going to be running a house. What's the point of wasting money on being educated? And that's only 50 years ago. The point I was going to ask about on the accounting was, have you looked at the distribution of the marks that were awarded for the examination grading? Because people who've looked at other institutions have noticed there is a clustering around the pass mark. A lot of students who get 48 instead of 50 are given 50 so that they can pass, and that you don't have too many failures, except those who are obviously pretty weak.
Oh, thank you. I have to check this point because actually I don't know if we have such a clustering distribution of the grades in our case. I have to check it. Thank you.
You, I don't see any other hands raised, so I think we can maybe conclude the presentations now. Our last presentation for the day is by Stephen Walker from Edinburgh University. Stephen will revisit the contributions of early women pioneers in accounting history. So Stephen, the floor is yours.
Thanks everyone for attending, and also thanks to Karen for the invitation to present. As you'll see from the title of this presentation, it's very short, and that kind of reflects the embryonic state of this particular project. And it kind of emerges from some work that I've been doing on the way in which professional bodies use history. There was a paper in Accounting and Business Research a couple of years ago which explored some of these themes. And I've become quite interested in the way in which professional bodies in the UK in particular, especially very recently, started to make an awful lot of fuss about their pioneer women. And I'm very interested in the way in which they actually used their pioneers to convey messages, particularly about diversity and inclusion. So going back a bit, in 2008, I did a review paper for AAAJ on where accounting histories of women stood. in relation to the sort of wider historiography of women, and basically came to the conclusion that we were making great progress in recovering women in this history of the profession, and also in their performance of accounting functions beyond it. But we were kind of stalled to some degree in that we seemed to have a limited connection with some of the things that were going on in women's history more generally outside of accounting, particularly in terms of employing feminist and gender historiography. And in particular, we seem to be quite locked in what I call the pioneer phase, which is focusing very much on those heroic frontiers women who were the first women to actually break down the barriers and enter the profession in particular. So there was kind of a call to broaden the horizon a bit. Having done that, I then ventured into pioneer studies of two women in particular, Mary Harris Smith, who was the first woman to be admitted to the ICAEW, the English Institute Chartered Accountants, and in many ways, more interestingly, Ethel Ayres Purdy, who was the first professional woman accountant who was admitted to a predecessor organisation of the ACCA. But what's really interesting to me is not their stories and repeating their stories again. It's the way in which professional bodies have recently been celebrating them, and they're being really memorialised as greats within the context of their own professional institutions, and they've become these important reference points for organisational claims about diversity. And there's also a kind of competitiveness going on here between the way in which the English Institute makes claims about its first and the way in which the ACCA is trying to kind of claim an agenda on the basis of its first, of being a forerunner of inclusion agendas in the profession. So for me, this kind of connects again with that agenda of how professional bodies use history. And in particular, in this case, how they're using histories of their pioneers. But just in case you're not terribly familiar with these individuals, I'll just say offer a little reminder about Mary Harris Smith in particular, the first woman to be admitted to the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales. After a considerable struggle, it has to be said, to break down the doors of admission, she was the daughter of a naval agent and a banker in London. Going back to the first presentation, she went to some of those bookkeeping classes that were emulated in Japan, that were held in London by the Society of Promoting the Employment of Women. She got a job in a mercantile firm in London and became an accountant to the Royal Society, a Royal School of Needlework. And importantly, in this story, she established her own accounting practice in 1887. And as soon as she set up herself in practice, she really attempted to get admission to the existing professional bodies of accountants. And almost all of her efforts were rejected and repelled. So she first tried the Society of Accountants and Auditors and was unsuccessful. Interestingly, also in the context of our paper this morning on Japan, she enlisted male support in order to attempt to make a case for her entry to the professional bodies, and also made a lot of connections with the liberal feminist movement. So she kept knocking on the door and was rejected through the 1880s and 90s. She moved from the Society of Accountants and Auditors to the ICAEW in the 1890s. And if you're familiar with the story, all manner of reasons were offered to her as to why, as a woman, she could not get access to this professional body. She never gave up, in the sense that she continued to try and pursue the interests of women, practicing women accountants, I think it has to be said, and made their case through all kinds of efforts in the early part of the 20th century, where the position of women in the profession became embroiled in registration legislation for the profession more broadly, and she was very keen to protect the interests of women in that proposed legislation. Just before the First World War, at the height of the kind of suffrage movement, she basically concluded that registration was another way to keep women out of the profession. And things quietened down, of course, during the war years, the First World War, in terms of the women's movement. But of course, the scene was changed quite radically in 1919 when legislation was passed that prevented a professional body from debarring the admission of an individual on the basis of their sex. So the issue was kind of taken out of the hands of the professional bodies, and they had to admit women thereafter. So in 1919, she was admitted as an honorary member of the Society of Incorporated Accountants. And in 1920, she was admitted as a fellow of the English Institute at the ripe age of 75 years. And in 2020, the ICAEW celebrated the centenary of Mary Harris Smith admission as the first female fellow in 2020. So after years and years of refusing her entry, there's now a cause of celebration. And you see this process during those celebrations of her becoming celebrified, if it's a horrible word, but it is a word. And this is the way in which organizations create celebrity as a means of selling and promoting a brand. And you can almost see this happening in the case of Mary Harris Smith. And I must confess that I have some kind of insight to this as a semi-participant, because as the Institute was planning their celebration in 2020, the research manager at the Institute approached me and asked me two things. First of all, do I have any photos of this Mary Harris Smith? And also, could I confirm the historical accuracy of her status as the first female chartered accountant in the world? Because they're intending to make a big play of this in celebration of the part that women play in the profession today. And this also coincided with the election of a president at the Institute, who was only the third woman president of the Institute. So you've got the sort of centenary year of Mary Harris Smith admission coming around at the same time as a new female president was being elected or appointed, and that individual was going to make a big deal during the presidential year about women and diversity. So Mary Harris Smith's centenary became very important to this agenda. Now, unfortunately, of course, as we all know, what happened in 2020, there was this horrific pandemic, and that kind of dampened a lot of activity. But still, an awful lot did happen, and Mary Harris Smith really became the focus of this campaign. She was held up as a shining example of female achievement and how women have had a really important role in shaping the profession. And they demonstrated their celebrification, if you like, of Mary Harris Smith by doing lots of really interesting things. First of all, they commissioned a portrait. And I had an email from the president of the Institute at the end of the celebratory year, where he said that the painting will be the first piece of art in our building to feature a woman. So the creation of the portrait is an important step to ensure the building reflects our history and our values. I felt slightly uncomfortable about that, knowing of the decades of attempts by Mary Harris Smith to get into that building. I found that a little bit problematic. But you know, she's held up as a shining example, and they commissioned the portrait, and there's the portrait. It now hangs in the Institute. I think there's probably an interesting discussion to be had with the artist about his construction of that and his portrayal of Mary Harris Smith. But they did all sorts of other things to really celebrate her achievement. She was given an Outstanding Achievement Award for her dogged determination to become a member, and her professional success and support for other female professionals as an inspiration to all who have followed in her footsteps. As we know, for decades after, there were very few who were able to follow in her footsteps. And they also, amazingly, commissioned a blue plaque, of which there aren't that many in London, really, relative to the number of famous people who've lived in that city. They commissioned a blue plaque, which they placed in the site of her office in the City of London, and made great play of the fact that, you know, there were few of these blue plaques, and that she would now be kind of up there with the status of Shakespeare, Chaucer, Pepys, Disraeli, and Dr. Johnson. So there it is. There's the plaque, which I haven't seen yet, sitting in Bucklersbury in London. They also did some really interesting and for us historians really important things during this celebratory year of Mary Harris Smith. They set up a centenary digital archive where women who were aged 65 and over were invited to contribute to an archive of their experiences, and they had a fantastic response to that. They also produced an online booklet, 100 Years Celebrating Women in Chartered Accountancy. Again, the story of Mary Harris Smith is related, and other examples of females who have progressed in the hierarchy of the Institute. Lots of imagery put out attending this event, which I call the monumentalization of Mary Harris Smith. These kind of memes and these other images are created. That's an interesting thing for me as well, how they create these. And you also find on the web accounting firms tapping into this, and also other commentaries which raise the profile of these pioneer women among the greats of the history of accounting. So, you know, Mary Harris Smith now sits up there with Pacioli and others. There we are. ICAW's Career Hub now have 8 accountants who changed history. There she is again. Individual practices really picking up on this Mary Harris Smith thing. One which was amazing. We hope you enjoyed learning about, they had an article on Mary Harris Smith. I hope you enjoyed learning about Mary Harris Smith, the world's first female accountant. If you're interested in working with a chartered accountant on any issue, please don't hesitate to get into contact with our experienced team. And this crossed the Atlantic as well. So there are firms in female-only firms comprising female practitioners, again, linking in with Mary Harris Smith's story. The other professional body which is heavily into this celebrification is the ACCA. And again, you probably know the story already, but this is the first woman to be admitted to a professional body, not the first woman chartered accountant like Mary Harris Smith. So the ACCA has a lead over the Institute in this respect because they have the first. And the ACCA made a great deal of this in their 2019 campaign about diversity and inclusion, balance for better. And again, they make a great deal about the pioneering effort of people like Ethel Ayres Purdy, and have done things to sort of really entrench her legacy by setting up something like the Ethel Ayres Purdy Lecture. Again, there's a nice construction of an image there. The problem that the professional bodies have with Ethel Ayres Purdy is there's only one photo and that's it. And it's not the best. And they're desperate to find better ones. So you get all this. Go on the web pages of the ACCA and see her really as an important figure in the history of the association. They refer to her in terms of agendas of innovation, of inclusion, making women count. International Women's Day, again, references back in 2024 to the first accountancy body to admit a woman. And she continues to be an inspirational figure. So what I'm interested in is how the professional bodies are using these pioneers in these ways, particularly at the point where they're celebrating historical events, usually in the form of centenaries. And I'm not sure how many here are familiar with this theme on using history. But this is quite a thing in management and organizational history. There are lots of studies, lots of papers on how to do this kind of history, and it's all about how organizations, companies, institutes, professional bodies, or whatever, use history as a strategic resource for reasons of stealing a position in a market, for consolidating social memory. And there's a whole agenda around what's called rhetorical history. And this is the strategic use of the past as a strategy to manage various stakeholder groups. There's also a nice concept of usable history, and this connects with pioneers in particular, which is because usable history tends to be individualized and very heavily focused on individual actors. And by that we mean, you know, the founders of a company, or in this case, the pioneer women. So I'm really interested in how these professional bodies use these pioneer women in these ways. There's lots of different frameworks out there to try and make sense of how organizations use history. One that I found quite useful because it connects very well with how the configuration of the professional bodies in the UK, there being several of them, they being quite competitive, is a focus on identity. Very useful study by Foster in 2016 et al., which distinguishes the use of history to construct identity, which is about creating an identity for your internal membership to increase organizational cohesion, and another identity-related concept of authenticity, which is creating a sense of distinctiveness for external audiences. And this is very relevant in the context where you've got lots of competing bodies all trying to show how different they are. And historical uniqueness and distinctiveness can be quite powerful in that context. They also have an absolute fixation, some institutes in accounting in particular, and I think specifically about the one that's a few miles away from me, ICAS, because of its historical uniqueness as a first. They focus an awful lot on anniversary celebrations, and this is exactly what we had with the Mary Harris Smith episode, and to some degree with the ACCA's celebration of the achievements of Ethel Ayres Purdy. You can see authenticity claims coming through, especially with the ACCA, because they have this unique position of having the first woman accountant, and they've got a very long history of stealing a march on the other professional bodies when it comes to issues of meritocratic-based recruitment. So you see on the webpage where they discuss their history, these kind of references to the achievements of pioneers and how the values of the Institute are reflected in the experiences and life courses of people like Ethel Ayres Purdy. So I'm interested in these kind of things, especially the use of anniversaries as a kind of arena and as a reason for making these kind of celebrations.
Steve-
So
Steve,
interested
sorry.
in these kind of things. Yep.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Just wanted to let you know that you have less than actually about 3 minutes to conclude the presentation, but carry
Well,
on.
that's very good because I think that is the last slide. So,
All right. Okay.
or just about. So, so going back to these experiences of the celebration of these women, what I think the research here needs to really penetrate and explore is the use of these pioneers to promote diversity and inclusion agendas. How are they being used by organizations? Is this constructive? Is it helpful? Or is there something slightly more sinister about it? So they're celebrating the achievement of heroic figures to inspire the current generation of women, which sounds great. If current, aspirants to the accounting profession want to use these women as examples for how they can, constantly knock on the door and knock down doors, then that's great. Are they being used to raise awareness of gender issues in the profession? I'm not sure. Or are they really just an exercise in symbolic diversity? What's particularly interesting to me, knowing the full story of these two women, is the way in which the professional bodies and how I've seen them use history in these two cases, is the selectivity around the way they relate the stories. So for the English Institute, Mary Harris Smith's story is about her admission. But her story is really not about that. It's about exclusion for 75 years of her life. So there's a sense in which there's a deliberate organizational forgetting of the full story that we as historians know about. So how the professional bodies select parts of these stories for their own purposes, whether they be authenticity claims or identity claims, or for some other purpose, is of real interest. And of course, the focus on the pioneers disregards the legions of other women whose stories are lost to us, and the many people, in addition to Mary Harris Smith and Ethel Liz Purdy, who were struggling in the male-dominated world of professional practice, who also tried to knock on the door, but have never got in, and so therefore are not celebrated as people who were ultimately admitted. So for me, going back to that first slide, I'm thinking, really, is this a way of also regenerating that recovery issue? So pioneers are where we often seem to like to spend a lot of our time when we research the women in accounting historically. But there might be other ways of looking at this in a feminist and gender history framework, thinking quite critically about how these pioneers are being used, and in that way potentially going beyond recovery studies into some of these feminist dimensions of the accounting history of women. Okay, thank you very much. That's it.
Yeah.
Chris, I would have left you the first one too, but I'm also happy to go. No problems, because I'm delighted to see Steve here and have heard these insights on the pioneers. And Steve, I'm really happy you're doing this research on the Firth of Forth and not at Hudson River, because there I think it would be much more problematic doing this type of research these days, which is what leads me to a first observation, reflection, comment before I have an ongoing question from this. Because I very much agree with what you said towards the ends, when we need to critically reflect on how these type of organizations use history actually, and how selective they are. Because this was my impression as you were going through the through your findings from the beginning. And I think also the current environment, the current political environment in many parts of the world, lay way to now see what are these firms, these bodies doing right now, as they've a few years ago started to celebrate these pioneers you're mentioning here. Are they turning this down now? Because I would suppose that if we look at what's going on in the US at the moment, that some of these stories will disappear there very soon if they have not already. And I think that this, maybe bringing this into your research right now, could add an excellent contemporary perspective also to the argument you're making there, strengthening the point of saying, look, it's not only used for marketing purposes, etc., but it's also aligned with a sort of political ideological zeitgeist, if you like, what is going on. And maybe you will know this much better than I am, just speculating here. Maybe there's also already some evidence, hints of these kind of zeitgeist alignments, maybe in the mid or early mid 20th century. I don't know if they started to do something there or play around with some of these elements as well, because I think that it might make an excellent critical reflection of the zeitgeist influences on the topic here as well. This is the thought I had. And the question, and I would like to draw on your infinite wealth of accounting and history insights. Are you aware, have we seen, are there studies out there, insights on if similar things also happen to what's organizationally closer to us, to universities, business schools, that they're using sort of history for this kind of purpose also with regard to, for example, admitting women to certain male-dominated studies, accounting, business management, I don't know, in the early beginnings, also technology and so on. Whether creating, supporting infrastructures to that type, is there much on these organizations yet? If you're
Yeah. I haven't studied these other organizations, but as you well know, as a former employee of an institution of which we are both very familiar, centenaries and celebrations of historic events are very much part of these organizations' psyche. So we had was it 2019, we had the business schools centenary, which was again a very distorted view of the historical reality. Yeah, I like the idea of the zeitgeist actually, and thinking more broadly about how these constructions are made in the context in which they're made. The point you make about what happens after in the intervening periods between have they now been forgotten? I think that's a really valid one. And again, the importance of anniversary as a point of celebration, and basically 99 years of silence, and then suddenly a grand visual impact. I think that's really interesting. I haven't heard anything from the institutes concerned post the anniversaries of these grand events, and I'm not expecting to. So yeah, thank you very much for the observation, and lovely to see you.
No, thank you likewise, Steve.
Thanks, both. Christopher, did you still have? Oh yes, I can see you now. Christopher, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, while you were talking, Steve, which and it's really interesting study, I think this. I was thinking of pioneers not being celebrated, and I was sort of reminded a bit about the work of Teresa Hammond and others looking at African American professional accountants in the USA, and wondering why just women? Why not people of different ethnic backgrounds, people of different religious backgrounds, and so on? Why is the focus on women?
Absolutely. That's a really good observation. I totally agree with you. I mean, given that this was very much about a diversity agenda and an inclusion agenda, it absolutely focused purely on women. And it looks as if it in the Institute's case, just a combination of things all came together that led to this focus. So they had a female president coming up. So, oh, let's go. And she was very keen to pursue this agenda. They happened to have this sort of historical accident of a centenary happening at the same time. But absolutely right. I think, yeah, the silences around all the other pioneers, including other pioneer women, is totally valid. I think that's absolutely spot on, Christopher. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Good to see you too.
Thanks, Christopher. Karen, go ahead, please.
Hi, Steve. Thank you very much for coming today. And as usual, amazing presentation. You mentioned selectivity, and I'm quite curious around the pictures. So the re-representation of the pictures for each of the women. So for Mary Harris Smith, her jacket in the original became a pullover with a blouse and some pearls. In Ethel Ayres Purdy, her quite smart blouse with the tie pin thing became a fluffy full blouse that looked very ridiculous. And they changed the colour of her hair. They also added books behind, and so I'm quite interested in this idea, not just of selectivity, but of actually changing the context, the story, and how much do you think that happens? And I guess maybe you've already slightly said this, but with this idea of anniversaryism, how much is there actual changing of the historical story, if you like?
The image one is fascinating, isn't it? And I was looking at it last night and thinking, where exactly what you said? Where did the chain or whatever is it come from? They actually have five, or the artist have. There are basically five photographic images of this Mary Harris Smith, which have been gathered from various newspapers and stuff. And the artist had access to all five of them. So I suspect what he's done is he's taken one of them as core. You can see the one that I left in the slide. This is obviously his basic framework for constructing this portrait. But he's also picked up one or two things from other images which you haven't seen in this presentation. But the other thing which fascinated me, as you observed, Karen, is the books behind, the learned construction around this, because I think the image that we had originally, it looked as if it was either in her office, and you can see a mantelpiece or something behind her and some ornaments. So I think it's probably time to talk to the artist. I mean, you could imagine quite an interesting kind of, almost like an oral history project around a discussion with an artist.
And quite a feminization of depiction of women, which is interesting as well.
They hate the fact, especially with Ethel Ayres Purdy, that there is nothing much to play with. The ACCA are desperate for a really good photo of this pioneer, but the one that we have comes out of the Daily Mirror, and it's heavily kind of pixelated, and it's dreadful. So their response is now to create these memes of it.
Fascinating.
It is. Yeah, it really is interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
No, pleasure.
Thank you. And we have actually we've just gone over the time, but we still have a few more questions. So if you could just very quickly, if you can just go through the questions. Richard, would you like to go ahead with your question?
Thanks. Yes, very interesting, Steve. You could also ask the artist, why did he make her look so miserable?
Yeah.
Much more miserable than the photograph. But I was going to ask a couple of questions. There are all these claims about being the first in the world. So I was a bit surprised. Did not the American Institute have women?
they're very keen to make sure that the first chartered accountant, the first women chartered accountant, they're quite careful around that. But again, yeah, I mean, I'm sure you could find other examples of practicing women accountants in other countries, who are equally
Certainly,
pioneers. They just didn't happen to have a professional credential.
yeah, I mean, in China and Russia, women are very prominent in accounting.
Absolutely.
It's a bit of a sleight of hand to say it's the first chartered accountant when the only people who've got chartered accountants are
Yeah.
England and Scotland. You know.
Yeah. This being the first has some kind of mythical, well, it's not mythical, well, I suppose it is, real grandness about it, that they're absolutely desperate. This first thing
Yeah,
is crucial to them.
yeah. Yeah, very interesting. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Martin?
Stephen, some anecdotal evidence. For my sins, I'm writing 100 years of CPA Ireland to be
Oh, good luck.
given on the 11th of March 2026. But CPA Ireland is now part of Chartered Accountants Ireland. Okay.
Yeah.
Part of the deal was they get to write the history. One of the things we've been instructed to include is diversity. So it kind of goes to your early comments. Yes. But interestingly, as part of that, I'm reading a lot of the history. Robinson, 1964. I don't know
Brilliant.
but they talk about everything you've said has been mentioned in 1964 without any agenda. Did we even have a DEI type thing back then? And then I can share this email it if you want, a comment from their 1988 centenary. The 64 book was not a centenary. It was just Howard Robinson wanted to do a history. He was the president. But so the Irish Institute was the first of the chartered bodies to recognise the rustle of taffeta sweeping through the portals hitherto untrod by other than by male footsteps. And due credit, and here's the thing, did the Irish not realise they thundered the English Institute that there would be nothing to prevent its women members from practising in England, Scotland or Wales and describing themselves as ACA or FCA? And Robinson, 24 years earlier, said that Great Britain seemed to have a problem with women.
Yeah.
That I find very interesting.
It is, yeah. Robinson's actually, I reckon, it's the best history there is of a professional body. It's a superb.
It is.
Yeah. So, brilliant. Yeah. Good luck. Well, I'd be interested to see how you get around the centenary.
But it relates to Sebastian's thing about time. Like in 1964, this was being written about. They weren't being, what's the word used? Celebralized. It was just
celebrified.
It was just being written as factual. This was the first lady in Chartered Ireland.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks. Wonderful presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Ryoko, I think you had a question, but I don't see you with my screen anymore. Oh yeah, I can see you now, Ryoko.
Just two comments, sorry. And I'm completely agree that how the the pioneer women are focusing now in relation with the diversity, and completely agree. But there are some good points, because thanks to this, in Japan, I am now able to give presentation on topics like mine in the field of accounting. So they open the possibility to carry out the investigation on these topics in Japan. And I am currently researching about the Japan's first female accountant, and I interviewed her colleagues who are still alive, and there was no hint of exclusion. And she was invited to become one of the founders of the first accounting firm in Japan. And it even seemed that she was welcomed. But nowadays, the ratio of female accountant remains low. So in Japan, accountants are a profession. Therefore, I think that the entry of women into accounting profession cannot be explained from the perspective of the professionalization project. Thank you.
So you're doing another project on a first?
Perfect.
Yeah, interesting. Good.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Well, good luck with your research. It looks really interesting. There are so many dimensions of women in accounting that came through from your study. Lots of different things, rather than, to me, it looked like something where there are sort of several papers to explore, several themes to look at. Yeah, but I look forward to seeing them all published.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much, Steve, and thank you for all the questions.